All right. Hi, everyone. We have everyone from all our lead artists from Power to the Prompt here. I'm Carlos Roa. I am the program manager for The Painted Bride. Before we begin this this gathering, because this is the first time everybody here is kind of met each other in the same room. I think I should give some context about what Power to the Prompt is. So Power to the Prompt was a conversation series that The Painted Bride had started, where we surveyed people in different neighborhoods throughout Philadelphia, and we asked them the question, if you had a magic wand, what would you change about your neighborhood? And we had me and the rest of the programming committee, everyone had kind of collected this data and kind of figured out what to use with this data. And we knew that we wanted a group of artists to make work in response to the data. So what we have is, three projects that came out of it. The first was Mehgan's project, Heard That. And then we had TS's project, which is still going on. You can still participate in Community Capital, South Philly Afrofuturist walking experience. And we also had Tyrell and Nina's project, Call Home, which just closed last week. It was a very lovely crowd. So yeah, why don't we begin? The format for this, we wanted to kind of not do like a typical Q&A or panel style thing and just have you all come up with questions to ask each other. Before we do that, can you all introduce yourselves? I guess we can start. The person I see to my left is Terrell. So if Terrell, you want to introduce yourself, say your name, pronouns, what kind of work, a little bit about yourself as an artist, what kind of work you did for Power to the Prompt, and then you can pass it to someone else in the call.
All right, what's going on, everyone? My name is Tyrell Halsey. I'm an artist who uses photography as my voice here in Philadelphia. I focus on street photography, but it's really a fusion of like street, conceptual, documentary, and portraiture. And for this project, it was mostly portraiture of the different people who participated in Power to the Prompt, going to their neighborhoods, going to their homes, and talking with them and trying to embody their story through portraiture. And also, if I had time to go around the community and photograph different stories there. So yeah, I'll pass it to Mehgan is down there. I'll pass it to Mehgan.
Hey, I'm Mehgan. I am a dancer and visual artist in Philadelphia. Performance is kind of my training, my background. That's kind of the way I came to art, but I've been getting really interested in making projects with what we have around. So that includes the body, but that also includes a lot of waste and a lot of, things that we don't necessarily think to have value all the time. And for this project, I was really interested in kind of keeping the conversation going, like how many different layers of this conversation can we have? So putting the neighbors that I have in my South Philly community in direct response to some of this data from the folks who wrote in from that neighborhood. So I kind of like the idea of like putting neighbors in conversation with one another when they don't know each other. They might have crossed each other in the street and don't know it. And then recording their voices and having another layer of conversation where Ty was able to make music in response to what folks were saying to these recordings and incorporate the recordings into his process. And then another layer, which was the dancing. So I was really interested in that, don't let it stop. Yeah, and I'll pass on over to TS.
That's awesome. Thank you, Mehgan. Wow. Yes, I love layers. I love nuance. All of that things warms my spirit so much. Hello, humans of the virtual world. My name is T.S. Hawkins. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. And I am the lead artist for Community Capital and Afrofuturism South Philly walking experience. And I wanted, because of COVID, so that's a thing, put that in this space. I still wanted to do like a walking experience, but we switched it to the virtual aspect because COVID is outside. COVID is in the streets. And the beautiful part about it going virtual is that people literally from across the globe have been able to access this art and access South Philly like a new place for them. With this project, I partnered with the amazingly brilliant historian and archivist Lois Moses, and the whole point of fusing history and future in this like Afro-futurist poetic landscape. So that's essentially the breadth of the project, and it is still going on. And we are looking to actually expand the project to a phase 2, because there was a lot more stuff that we wanted to tap into, but you know, due to time and circumstance, we weren't able to. So we want to make it breathe even more. So yay. Pass it to 240, Nina.
Hey, what's going on? My name is Nina Elizabeth Lyrispect Ball, and I was a co-lead on.
Oh no, you're muted.
You're muted, Nina.
Hey, all right. I'm sorry that took so long to realize I was muted. Hey, everybody. My name is Nina Elizabeth Lyrispect Ball, and I was a co-lead on our project Call Home with Tyrell Halsey, street photographer. Part of the work that I did was take the responses from over 100 people and interpret them into poetry, translating, the work, the words, the sentiment of the neighbors that were surveyed, and translating that into poetry. And that was a great honor and a great challenge at the same time. I also was looking to connect and weave through the photography and the portraiture that Tyrell put forth, and finding cohesion in the message and the images. And it was a really, fun challenge. And it was just an interesting process for all of us involved, but definitely very rewarding. And I found a lot of the same themes continue to come up throughout the work. So I did a series. I wrote 20 original poems. I added one additional poem that I felt was appropriate for the exhibit. There were 14 haiku, 2 pantun, 1 villanelle, 1 ranga, and maybe 2 free verse. Well, 2 free verse equaling 20. And then the additional free verse piece. And we just kind of worked to bring that to life in pictures and in poetry, and really, I guess we'll get into later, like our process. Yeah. But, that was a really fun process and a great challenge in terms of which poetic forms I use to express, these different feelings and these different sentiments, and tying it all in together with the really beautiful, stunning photography. That's me.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming out here on this Zoom call. So the way we're doing this is that we're asking each other questions, any curiosities we have about the process, power of the prompt, themes of your projects, etc. Feel free to ask whatever questions you have for the group. Thank
you, Os. I had a question for Nina and Tyrell. Because poetry, that's where I live and breathe. So I was like, yes, more poetry in the world. And Nina, you brought up something in regards to like being overwhelmed in the process, like the undertaking. And when I was doing interviews for Community Capital, like I kept coining it like it is a beautiful burden. Can you say more about like what was overwhelming about putting all those stories and connecting all that energy together, and how you worked through it? Because I got through it, but I don't know if I got through it successfully.
Sure. I wouldn't say that I was overwhelmed. I was definitely challenged though. And I think what it was is there was so much material, right? And there were so many gems in what people were saying. There's some people that gave you like one sentence, like clean up the trash, and other people who were like, my mother lived here since 1968 and then I came, and so there are all these different varied responses from, just a simple, like, this is all I want for my neighborhood, to I have this dream and that dream, all the way to nothing, my neighborhood's great, and really honestly trying to do everyone justice. I know a lot of times with my work, my advocacy is for Black and brown people, LGBTQ plus community, all of those different things. But I also love that as an artist, you know, I can represent lots of different other people. And I wanted to make sure that it was really clear that like my advocacy is a very intentional thing, but it doesn't stop me. So it doesn't stop me from speaking for all people. So I was trying to be really mindful of making sure everyone felt represented and those voices felt represented, because there were, you know, white folk, Black folk, you know, non-binary folk, males, females, you know, everything in between. And I didn't want it to feel skewed in any way. I really wanted to neutralize the voices as much as possible, but also specify the voice, right? So like, you know, I saw some comments that if I were doing an exhibit on my own, it's super evocative and I'm just like, and provocative, and I'm like, yeah, to put that in. But I didn't see how certain comments would be useful in this space, because much like all of you, I felt the theme of like, speak to your neighbor, you know, like that person's right down the street. Like a lot of what people are asking for is more connectedness. And so I made a conscious decision to not be as provocative in the sense of, I really want to make you think in this way. I wanted it to be more reflective and more heart-centered. And I think when we got to the core, once we found the title, I think that's when we really found our footing. So when it got to Call Home, we were just getting to the heart of the matter. And essentially that theme is about, you know, when you venture too far away from home, you get to a space where you need to call back and find out what's going on there. The only way to do it is to intentionally connect with what's going on at the heart of the matter. So that's how I overcame it. That was kind of my North Star throughout the process. If I could just swing it right back to you. Well, you did say Tyrell too, so I'm gonna let Tyrell answer, but then I'll throw a question out if nobody else has one. Okay.
Yeah, going along with that. So yes, I know you said like the burden. For me, I guess it was more so the pressure of wanting to tell their stories and tell their experiences in a way that the audience is going to take it in and in the way that they intended it to be. Like Nina said, like we're artists, we have things that we advocate for, we have things that we fight for, we have our own voice, but we didn't want our voices to overtake everybody who participated in this project. So there were about 15 people specifically who we reached out to. We reached out to everybody a second time to see who would want to be photographed for the project. And there was 15 people specifically who responded and filled out the thing. And that's who I went and I spent the time with, and just really, you know, some people I spent an hour and a half, like really just talking with them and just getting to know them before I even picked up the camera. So it's, for me, it was like, I want to make sure that they are seen and they are heard. And for me, that was the whole point of bringing the portraits directly to them, directly to their homes, was to give them voice and agency, and for their voice and their stories to prevail over anything else. And obviously, you know, in our artist voice, we have our own style to bring that to light, but we wanted it to be, you know, for the community. So.
Awesome. I'm gonna try to keep us rolling here. Thank you, Tyrell, for that really thoughtful response. My question actually is for both TS and Mehgan, and I think I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I was on a little late. I really want to know how you both in your respective projects came to the approach, you know. So Tyrell and I talked a little bit about how we came to our process approach. I would love to hear a little more about like why a walking tour, and then why dance, and why these different mediums you all chose to really interpret that work in that way. And why was that the best use or the best tool to get across your point and your desired outcome?
I'll go for it. I guess I first was thinking about having it be like a sound bath where we got to hear each other's voices. That was like my initial kind of calling, because dance, as amazing as it is, as expressive as it is, there's so much of like your own interpretation on the theme that happens when you're expressing something. That kind of what Nina and Terrell, what you were both talking about with wanting to keep it true to the voice is, I felt like I don't want the dancing to be the first point, the first entry point. You know, I want to like kind of cultivate more, I guess, like specific listening or like more detail that corresponds to people's actual voices. That was a long-winded, long way about it, but for me, the dancing was very much like an added thing. It felt like just kind of like a cap to it. It felt like the way to kind of draw people in on the street and be part of this, and a way for myself and for the dancers to have our own reaction to what we were reading and what we were interviewing people about and speaking to people about. And same for Ty, for the music. Like I wanted there to be as much like literal voice as possible, but I also wanted Ty to have the creative license to have his own reaction to what he was hearing in these voices. And so that was kind of like, and I think he did such a beautiful balance of sharing his thought of writing his own response, but also just like keeping the voices as is so we can hear what everybody is thinking. Yeah, that's kind of how I came to that. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you, Mehgan. I love like the whole like the sound bath, because Lois and her husband / collaborator for the final piece in our work is called Ancestral Petition. And that's what we were gunning for. A literal sound bath from the ancestors was essentially important when constructing this walking experience of South Philly. Like, I guess not the pivot, but like the polar opposite of Tyrell and Nina's work. They're like honoring the voices, you know, that fill out the form. It's like, yes, making sure that we have trash cans in our neighborhood is hella important. Because I've lived in different sections of Philadelphia, and I'm like, bruh, seriously? Like, these are the things that outsiders, when they look at your neighborhood, how they perceive what your neighborhood is about from like the small little minute things. And even when I was going through like all of the voices on the people who submitted, my spirit wouldn't let me lean that way. Like, I don't know, like I kept being tapped on the shoulder. It's like, there are voices missing. There are voices missing in this process that need to be addressed, for the mere fact that we are on Lenape land and everyone wants to like shove it under the rug. You know what I mean? Gentrification, redevelopment, whatever we want to call it. You know what I mean? It's like sucking the air and the energy and the essence of the communities that we swear we know and love, and that, to quote Nina and Terrell, call home. Like, you know what I mean? So like I leaned heavily into the historical nature of our present day life. And as someone who is Black and is queer, who lives in South Philadelphia, I am often invisible. The community, as much as Philadelphia purports itself to be a space of like, oh, we're a city of neighborhoods and this brotherly love, sisterly affection, and it's not those things all the time if you are not in a certain lane that appeases certain folks for you to be seen as value. So it was very, very important to honor the Black, the brown, the indigenous, and queer voices of South Philly that get erased with redevelopment, dog parks, gentrification, Wawa's taking out the mom and pop spaces, like, oh, we feel safe because we moved to South Philly. Like, okay, cool beans. Columbus Square is still called Columbus Square. There's statues of a man who like raped, pillaged, blundered whole bodies right? And I felt more compelled to move forward with that tonality when sitting with the selection panel and people brought up, they're like, well, you know, the Italian population and the, you know, the Polish and the Irish population will feel erased in this project. And I said, that's funny, considering that your cultures erase the Black and Indigenous voices that actually cultivated the land. So when I learned about the whole history of like South Philly was just considered the 7th ward and how it was Black, brown, Indigenous bodies that create the South Philly that the Mummers Parade strolls through, mocks in their version of satire, it's very, very disturbing. And the more I learned and the more that was unearthed about the culmination that is South Philly, I was saddened, like, you know, like I was saddened, I was distraught, but in this weird way, I just felt empowered to be loud. So I was so thankful to have a team of people alongside me who could actually live in that voice and help me bring it to life.
Yeah, I think you make some really powerful points, TS. I mean, so many, I don't even know where to start, but I think about how just for me, the stigma of South Philly alone as a Black, you know, woman identified person, you know, I have never desired to be or live in South Philly. I like Italian market. I keep it pushing. From the time I came here as a transplant, when we went to school together, I just knew South Philly wasn't welcoming for me. It wasn't for my kind of person. And you know, and having overcome so much in your life as all these different others, these other boxes that you check, I was like, I don't need that stress, you know? And even when I remember seeing like pictures from Tyrell, and Tyrell had gone into Italian market in South Philly, and I'm like, you got it, bro, because I have no desire to be there. But you know, you speak about you know, placement and displacement, and it reminds me of how in one of my pieces, I thought exactly what you said about the Lenape indigenous folk. You know, gentrification came up a lot as a theme throughout this work, but it occurred to me in the process, I'm like, wait a minute, but when we're talking about who was here first and all of that, really going back to the core of who was inhabiting this land first, you know, and who there's no evidence hardly of, you know, in a physical way, like in a human breathing way in these same spaces. One of the pieces is called, I think it's called To Speak to a Representative, and it starts, and that's one of the pantoums, you know, and for anybody listening, a pantoum and a villanelle like are both forms that have repeating lines. So you really only write about 10 or 13 lines, and those lines repeat throughout the work. And I really wanted to, you know, just quickly, a side note, wanted to explore, like, you know, deepening call home, right? The idea of calling and the idea of home. And so the 0 to 9, you know, progression of numbers, I wanted to work with a limited number of lines in poetry to really express myself through that. And that was one of the challenges. But the first line is from the Lenape indigenous, you know what I mean? Like, you know, just holding a space in the exhibit for those folk, you know, to say like, there are people that are going to hold up your name and speak of you even in rooms you are not present in, number one. Number two, you know, I hear that 100% about like, you know, what voices get represented, what voices don't get represented, you know, in a space. And I think that that's the challenge that we all have. Like, how do we want to bring forth this work? And then what can be really discovered just by showing up and inferring your own meaning from what's there and what's even missing, you know? I had another point, but I am riffing. So I am going to leave the floor back open because I feel like I can talk. You know, I'm going to leave the floor open for somebody else to jump in.
I'll jump in real quick. Like, Nina, I think a beautiful thing is seeing that poem and also hearing you express that at the opening about the Lenape. Janine Osayunde in her interview video, you know, did talk about the Lenape in her Black historic Swarthmore neighborhood. And I think that's before, I don't know if you even seen it at that point. So it was kind of a beautiful thing for you to think of that, for her to think of that, for, I don't want to say collectively, but for that to be present in our project. And then also as far as like the voices, I think Nina, me and you talked about this too, the people who decided to participate A lot of them ended up being people who felt like they needed to be heard. A lot of elder Black women, majority elder Black women, one Black male. Well, yeah, but majority elder Black, you know, people was the theme, not the theme, but ended up participating in that next step. And gentrification did ended up being a huge theme for us. I think another thing was just like green space, wanting to have more conversations with one another. But yeah, so I think it's dope to see how, the four of us kind of interpreted it in our different ways, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. Like, I really truly love that, because our first piece is a piece that I wrote that's literally an ode and open letter to the Lenape period. And it's called Beacon Unearthed, using the English translations of their language to just literally write them an open letter to say thank you. It's like, the call in that piece is bring me home, bring me home, bring me home. Like, so I love that. I love that across the board. Like, we're like, no, we got to start from the beginning and then we'll branch out. So yes, praise. I'm here for that.
Yeah, I think I was curious about like, especially in my neighborhood, meeting folks where they were at. So for people who were happening by, I just moved from like 6th and Morris over to right on Passyunk Avenue. And it is bustling. There are people out, they are brunching, they are doing their shopping, they are in the fancy stores. And there were a lot of wealthy white people who are participating in the interviews. And what I was curious about was the juxtaposition between the responses from the folks who lived in that neighborhood, the Passyunk, East Passyunk, Dickinson kind of area, versus what were the themes of conversation that other people were writing about from North Philly or from West Philly. Like, we're talking about drug problems and education crisis and gentrification and housing collapse. And in South Philly, it was lack of green space and cleaner streets. And so I was really kind of interested in pushing people to think differently, especially like knowing that audience, knowing that I would be in the Passyunk Square, that triangle, hot for like the brunch strollers with the families and the and like, how can I meet you where you are and give you a challenge, let you hear yourselves, and juxtapose that with something different, something that you hadn't thought about, somebody else's voice, Ty's voice, our bodies. And that felt really, it felt like a subtle thing to do, and it felt like the right thing to do. But yeah, I think I had rather than going, I think I could have gone deeper. I could have gone into the past, but I was curious about just like what I was getting from people face to face when I would ask them. So, our kind of Pan and I, who were conducting the interviews, our question, we would kind of repeat the same question, was, these are some of the topics that people have written about from these different neighborhoods. Folks from this neighborhood have talked about trash being the biggest issue. Do you believe that? Like, what do you think about that? And that was just kind of the only thing we would say and let people run. And it was kind of surprising to hear like not across the board, but kind of like the vapid being okay. That's all people wanted to talk about, was the vapid. So that was curious for me, but yeah.
Thank you, Mehgan. Can folks like hit me up to like this need for green space? Don't get it twisted. Trees are sexy. Even though I'm an indoor cat, I acknowledge trees and grass are sexy. However, when I hear green space, something in my brain, it like there's an alarm, there's like a red flag. I don't want to co-opt the word trigger, but it's the word that's coming to my brain. Like something is triggering about that, because that means for me, it's an immediate erasure of something. Like there, it's language. So when we see a Wawa pop up in the neighborhood, we know gentrification is coming, right? When I start seeing dog parks, which I think is what whiteness equates to green space, that's triggering for me. So could you all just explain for those folks who addressed the need for green space, like what that was for you in your process?
Yeah, for me, I think it was very clear that is what folks were talking about. They were talking about dog parks. They were talking about having more land, having more space to expand out. That is what it felt like to me. It felt like I don't want to be, cramped in with all of these people. I want to expand. I want to, and yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there.
I was like, they moved to a city. Like, I don't understand. Like, you're going to be on top of people, next to people, in people. Like, that's how it works. Like, it's you move to a city. And they need to stop trying to turn East Passyunk literally into like the Lower East Side, because Philly is not New York. Cease that nonsense. Philly is not New York. Philly is Philly. It has its own breath. It has its own beat. Let it be. So I try to stay away from East Passyunk as much as I can, because I was like, I don't understand water fountains and tuxedos. Where y'all going? It's Philly. Stop it. Like, just stop. But thank you, Mehgan. Thank you for that. So I was like, what do they mean by green space?
Yeah, I'll jump in a little bit, more as a segue, because I just, you definitely gave me food for thought. So I'm actually just chewing on that, because I know green spaces did come up. But man, that's a plate. I'm gonna take this plate off to the side and think about all of that, about the wanting more space and the wanting to expand after having like taken over a space that was already occupied. So like, I just want to chew on that for a minute, but I do want to connect it to the disconnectedness, yes, that there can sometimes be when folk move into certain spaces. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about my own neighborhood, but I've been in this place for 11 years. So I've watched it go from hood bars and don't go down that street to like joggers and people and their dogs. And a park I used to go watch the moon in is now been turned into a dog park. It wasn't even designated as a dog park until folk decided that's where they wanted their dog to go. And just watching, myself get a bus shelter and a bus seats in the shelter, where before we just had to stand on the corner, and now there's shelter for it. And now there's a place to sit when you're waiting for the bus. And now the corner stores are upgraded and they're, selling our own stuff back to us. So it's just been like an interesting watching it unfold. And I think gentrification has like multiple sides, you know what I mean? Because gentrifiers aren't always necessarily white, aren't always necessarily a certain age, aren't always necessarily like, I've definitely met brown gentrifiers, younger, older, everything in between. And, one of the haiku says, well-meaning, they come, wanting diversity, but we are not heirs. That's one of the haiku. And, it's not even for some, because I feel like I've seen both sides of this. For some, it's not even, I'm trying to come up in here and take all your whatever. It's like, oh, starting off my life, or I'm finally branching out on my own, and here I am in this space. And there are people willing to share the space in a really healthy way. Whereas there are other people that look at me on my own block like I'm the one that doesn't belong there. Like, like they actually change their behavior when they walk past me because I stoop sit a lot. So there's like multiple sides to that. But speaking of an additional disconnection, I'll connect back to another piece of work. I think this one is called Answering Machine, and it's one of my favorite pieces for the work. And I really had fun with even like the titles because, I use letters and numbers to spell out the titles. with answering machine, it talks about from Kensington Beach to Rittenhouse Square. And I basically lay out the scene of a market. So one is a drug market, one is a farmer's market. And it's about like how both are very disconnected from each other. And the repeating line is the truth about Philly found between there, you know, because you brought up a really great point earlier, like Philly, like, you know, pretends to be this and touts that it's this and it's that and it's whatever. But, you know, we just like oftentimes like to push out the pretty to the front, you know what I mean? The open-mindedness, the we're all inclusive, when the truth is like the people dying on Kensington Beach, that long, you know, one of the largest open drug markets at least on the East Coast, but in the country, you know what I mean, is literally less than 5 miles from Rittenhouse Square, where, you know, people are not wanting for anything. Everything is at their fingertips, and there's a lack of awareness. So I talk about everything from in-kind donations to people not being able to make fare. I say, you know, make a left, end up on Pine, you know, just the double entendre of end up in a Pine box or end up on Pine Street, just the reference and the balance and the imbalance in between those disparities within Philadelphia. So there is a disconnectedness, and there's a lot of us that live in the grays in between, but that big polarization for me is what Rittenhouse Square represents and what Kensington Beach represents, and how neither population is interfered with, is bothered really by too many outside groups whatsoever, including the police, neither group. So just kind of bringing that to fore.
And I'm so glad you did. Like the beautiful part, like I love that we're all meeting now, you know, even like, you know, it's like it would have been great to meet earlier, but the beautiful part is that like we are meeting now and seeing the similarities, like the cohesiveness, and each of these pieces is beautiful, which clearly denotes that for me in this little moment, like that's the heartbeat of the city right there. You know what I mean? Like we came at it from so many different angles, but the core, the nucleus is very much the same. So just a comment like, hey, bless y'all for existing. Like Nina and I knew each other from like way back in the day, you know, that's way back in the day. But continued blessings for each and every one of y'all. So like, to anchor Nina's point, yes, our piece, The Walking Experience, has poetry, but it's also podcast. And I got to connect with my mentor in a different way. It was like, she looked at me as a peer and I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. I'm like, oh my God, am I an adult? Is this the adult moment? Am I grown? I'm grown. Okay, cool. This is awesome. And so getting that historical knowledge, she was telling us about like her time, like being a young human in Philly and like adulting in Philly, how like no one of color would go into what is now Center City or Old City. Like you wouldn't be caught dead as a person of color on that end of town because it wasn't for you, or the narratives or the methodology it wasn't for you. So there, like as much as we're like, oh my God, we're a city of neighborhoods, that was intentional. Like that's dog whistle language for redlining. Like it was intentional to keep certain people in certain substructs. And it's funny how we use it now as a tagline for inclusivity when it was segregation. So that always trips me out. We'd be like, oh my God, like we're in city neighborhoods. I was like, okay, no. All right, no. Like, y'all don't know what y'all talking about. Stop saying stuff like when you don't know the history of your neighborhood. It's crazy. So we talked about that in the podcast and learning, just like I said, beautiful burden. And I am just so blessed that we all were talking about the same thing in our own chosen genre to reach the masses. So hopefully there's some change, some equitable change for the humans that have been connecting with each of these pieces.
Well, you know, when you talk about, you know, the city of neighborhoods, I think that's a great segue into the final question that I wanted to ask everyone in the group. So we asked this question, you know, when we asked this survey question of, if you had a magic wand, what would you change about your neighborhood? It was addressed to people living in Philadelphia, but I felt like maybe it would have been really cool to come full circle and ask you all as a group, what is your answer to that question? If you had a magic wand, what would you change about your neighborhood, about Philadelphia? Because that was something I was very curious to hear, just you speaking for you, how you feel about your neighborhood or about the city as a whole.
If I may, if you're asking me personally, if I had a magic wand and could change anything about my neighborhood, I would give the land back to its originators and start anew. Because we have fucked it up. Sorry, we all are really about to say that. He's like, just give it back. Give the land back.
That's real. That's real. I missed out on like 3 points that I meant to chime in on, but just the thought of Center City and TS, I know you were saying, somebody saying you couldn't be caught dead there. And I feel like as a photographer, every time I'm there, I just see like, the fancy downtown and just think about like how this wealth is not spread out at all to, the rest of the neighborhoods, and just thinking like, it's interesting, like who is this for? And how the neighborhoods have been redlined and separated. When I saw some of the answers saying diversity, it's interesting thinking about what does diversity mean to those people? Are they moving into a neighborhood that was redlined and then seeking like, oh, now I'm making it diverse by beat? So it was just very interesting to see those responses. But for me, I think with a magic wand, I would say to get that wealth spread out throughout the city, and especially in the education systems.
I think I would say I'm working with kids right now, which has been really influential for me, but I would say maybe like if like people were more truly curious about one another and open to one another, like I think we would see a different kind of respect for each other. And I think we don't know what that's like. You know what I mean? We don't know what that really looks like. So I think that would be my answer.
Yeah, I mean, Terrell, I mean, I would definitely echo, distribution of wealth just, more evenly. If I had to choose some original ones, and Carlos, I guess is like fair and unfair, because I feel like these people that wrote their responses had time to think about it, because there's so much, right? Like, what I want to change about my neighborhood, just like more cohesion, more like, general like respect for the people that were here before people moved in. There's one block that, people just won't clean up their dog poo, and that just frustrating for me, because it's like, okay, well, welcome, you're here, but like, don't make it so I gotta like look where I'm stepping on this particular block. Like, you just don't care about the space you're in. Or sometimes the college students, when they move out, they just leave all the junk on the sidewalk. So just kind of the way the neighborhood is treated in general. But for some of us, this is home. And it's the only home we've had or known for a really long time. We're not transients, but for the city as a whole, I'd love to see more trauma-informed everything. Trauma-informed policing, trauma-informed education, informed anything across the board. Because, when we talk about the concept, not even the concept, if we talk about the issue of mental health, it's more pervasive amongst so many of us nowadays. And much of it is triggered by trauma. Much of it, starts with trauma. So if we can start to understand trauma, like, more on a deeper level, it will change how we engage with one another. We will choose our words more carefully. We will, take up space differently. We will also not encroach on other space in that same way. And so definitely trauma informed, like, something more intentional in that. And then I'm a big advocate for the arts. So I want to see more of it back in the schools. I want to see more free arts events where, some pollination, because like, I feel like I've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to cross into many art spaces, but there's like an entirely Black art space where I ain't never seen a white face, you know what I mean? And there's like some predominantly white art spaces where I see the same 15 Black faces, right? And and it's not just about Black and white, right? But just to give an example that we're not always pollinating as an arts community either, So I'd like to see the arts more pervasive in education, but also like for the public and also within us, because I do feel like the answer is within arts, and that arts heal and arts start conversations, and arts is what people turn to in a pandemic, and it's what entertains you as well as like consoles you. So art and trauma informed work.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much for taking the time to chat, to meet each other, to ask each other questions, to share insight, thoughtful wisdom, etc. We are going to close, and just as another reminder for folks, TS's project, Community Capital, is still available to experience. And thank you all for coming out. I hope you all have an amazing day.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting us. Have a good one, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care.